And thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I'm really excited to tell everybody about our studies on perches for broiler breeders. So for the next 30 minutes, I will take you through why we are investigating perches in broiler breeders, how the breeders are using the perches, and how perches affect breeder production parameters. I will also spend some time on where and how to place the perches in the commercial facilities, because this is an issue. I will also tell everybody about keelbone fractures, although that has really nothing to do with perches. We did that in the same flocks that we were investigated perches, so I thought this was a nice opportunity to tell everybody about that as well. So just a quick background for everybody, and I'm sure this is familiar for many. Perching is an important behavioral need for laying hens. So the birds on the picture here are perching, and many studies have shown how important this is for the birds, and they are actually willing to work very hard for access to perches. Perching is an anti-predatory behavior, which is something the birds will do in the wild to escape predators. And consistent with this strategy, we see that height in studies, the height of the perches are more important than the shape. So whether it's a mushroom shape or oval or square, that's less important than for the hens to get high up. And all this knowledge of how important perching is for the welfare of the birds, there has been mandatory perches for laying hens in many countries. This is the EU regulation stating that all laying hens must have at least 15 centimeters perch each, allowing them all to perch at the same time. So broiler breeders, they are the same species as laying hens, and thus we think that they do have the same behavioral needs. And some studies have investigated perches for breeders, and we see that they do use them, but not to the same extent always as the laying hens, and that they would tend to use platforms over perches. When you give broiler breeders platforms and perches that are the same height, they would tend to use the platforms. Another study saw that the perch height is also important, same as we see in laying hens. It needed to be at least 5.5 centimeters above the slatted area. So I will show you some pictures later, but you usually have the litter area and then the elevated slatted area, and the perches need to be elevated above that as well. Again, same for laying hens. The perch use in breeders are affected by the perch space. It needs to be at least 14 centimeters per bird. It increases with age in pullets. In the nature, we would typically see that for the first couple of weeks, the chicks would spend time with their mothers hiding in the bushes rather than perching. But as they grow older, the perching increases. And they also perch more during dark periods, and lighter hybrids of broiler breeders tend to perch more. So there's a lot of similarities between what we see in the breeders as to what we know from laying hens. However, most countries do not have a regulation giving perches for broiler breeders. The Norwegian government has suggested now in the new regulation that all broiler breeders must be able to perch at the same time, and that is also including the roosters. And EFSA has also in their new recommendation pointed to the importance of perches for broiler breeders. In Animalia, where I work, we get asked from the farmers, okay, but if the government demands that we are using perches, what type of perches? How should we place them? What kind? How high? We had so many questions that we didn't really find answers to, which is the background for the 3 studies that I will tell you about. Just going to take that away. So for the 3 studies that we did, the first was perching in breeder pullets. The second was perching behavior in adult broiler breeders, and the third was effect of perches on health and production in broiler breeders. And all of these studies are done out on commercial farms and in different flocks. And here is where I wanted to tell you a little bit about keelbone fractures, just to give you some background to that as well. So some of you may be aware of this, maybe not all. that there is a very high prevalence of keelbone fractures in laying hens. Some studies have found that more than 90% of the commercial laying hens have keelbone fractures. So here you see a picture of the keel from the inside. So you see it's smooth, there's no fractures on that. And this picture you see 1, 2, 3 fractures on the inside of the keel. And this is the typical type of fractures that we have been seeing both in the breeders and in the laying hens. These type of fractures have been found in all production systems, so aviary, cages, organic, hobby flocks even, and in different layer hybrids. We also investigated it in red jungle fowls and some of the more primitive strains, where we also found some fractures, but not as high as in the commercial laying strains. Previously, the theory was that keelbone fractures was due to crashing with the aviary system, but it doesn't add up with the type of fractures that we are seeing, because if it were a fracture or a trauma, you would get them higher up and not on the inside of the keel as these fractures are seeing. So the main theory now is that it has to do with egg laying in itself, the size of the hen, the size of the egg, and the age of the hen, but there's still much we do not know about this. So keelbone deviation, as you see on these pictures, that can be related to perches if the birds are sitting on the perch for a prolonged time. Keelbone fracture is another thing. So in order to get a reliable assessment of keelbone fractures, you need to do a postmortem as the top 2 pictures, or using an X-ray machine. We actually published a paper previously this year in avian pathology with the title "Keelbone Fractures in Broiler Breeders. Is Palpation a Reliable Diagnostic Method?" And the quick answer for you guys is just no. You could flip a coin and get more secure answers, because it's really difficult to palpate these fractures from the outside. So with all our work on keelbone fractures in laying hens, we also wanted to investigate the prevalence in broiler breeders, which we did at the same time as we did the perching studies. All right, so what we did in study 1, we wanted to investigate use of perches by broiler breeder in rearing, so 0 to 18 weeks. We wanted to investigate preference of the birds for the perch types and different heights, effect of hybrid, and whether the perches had a negative effect on keelbone fracture, keelbone deviation, and footpad dermatitis. So what we did, we had 4 commercial breeder flocks, so 2 flocks with Hubbard and 2 flocks with Ross 308. So those are the 2 most common broiler breeder hybrids in Norway. This was done about 2 years ago in 2021. So in each of the flocks, we had 7,500 hens divided into 3 different groups. And this is how it's typically done on farm. Each of the groups then have 2,500 birds. One group in each flock had the A-frame. So those are the type of perches that you see on the pictures. The other group had Siesta perch. I will show you that on the next slide. And the third was control. So this is the A-frames. It's based on the A-rack from Big Dutchman. It's 150 centimeter long, and the 2 levels of perches were 35 and 95 centimeters high. Each flock had 4 of these with the different materials, so wood, steel, plastic, and the steel round square. And you see it's kind of placed in different position in all 4. So that's why we could test the height and the type of material. So this is what it would look like out on the farm. You see from the left, you see the plastic perch, and then the steel square, the steel round, and then the wooden round perch. The Siesta perch is a product from Big Dutchman, and this is how it would look out on the farm. So these are just a couple of day-old chicks. In order to observe perching behavior, we use pictures at week 2, 5, 7, 10, and 15, where a number of birds per perch were counted. We also filmed all of the flocks for 1 hour at week 6 and 12. And we also scored the different health parameters at week 16 with 30 birds per group, scoring foot pad dermatitis using the welfare quality scale, keelbone deviation, and keelbone fractures. And here you see we do use palpation, although I just told you that's not reliable, but we did that for different reasons. First of all, that was before we knew how unreliable palpation was. It was difficult to bring the portable X-ray out on all of these different farms because we had to fly to get to many of them. And also these are healthy young pullets, so we didn't want to do a lot of postmortem on them. So we did palpation. So some results for you. So this is on the x-axis, you see the different weeks. And basically we see that perching increases with age in both hybrids. You see already from 2 weeks, the birds are using the Siesta perch. So that was only 15 centimeters high. And they were using it, the farmers told us they were using it from day one, basically. They were jumping on and off. Overall, we saw more birds perching on the Siesta perch compared to the A-frames. And the Hubbard perch more than the Ross, which is also consistent with previous studies. When it comes to the preference for height and perch type, to make a complex figure quite easy, we didn't see any preference for the height or the type of number of birds per meter of perch. However, if you notice the y-axis here, there's quite few birds actually perching, because at this age, each meter of perch should accommodate 20, 11, and 7 birds at 5, 10, and 15 weeks. And if you see on the y-axis, we're far away from that. So the perches were not used to full capacity at all. For the health indicators at 15 weeks, we did not observe any keelbone deviation or keelbone fracture. For the foot pad dermatitis, there were no significant differences. This is the figure. So you see on the left is the Ross flocks. There is a numerical higher foot pad dermatitis score, but it was not significant. So to sum up that for you, we see that both hybrids perch more with age, with the Siesta being used really early on, already from day one. We didn't score them until week 2, but we know that they used them early. No preference for height or perch type. And we see that there is a difference between the hybrids. So the hybrids perch more than the Ross, and the Ross prefer the Siesta. So again, it's kind of making your management fit your hybrid. We were surprised that the perch utilization was so low, because we did expect them to have a strong need and motivation to perch, but we were kind of discussing it could be due to because we didn't have enough perches for all of them to perch at the same time, so that could have affected it. We also did observation during the light period, and we know that they would be perching more during the dark. But we didn't see any negative effect on the health indicators. Another thing I should mention is that some of the farmers were a bit kind of, because they are fed using spin feeders, and whether the perches would kind of affect the way the birds were moving, but that was not a problem at all. So the farmers were quite happy with them. So we wanted to see the perching also in the broiler, the adult breeders. So again, assessing use of perches and preference for different materials in the breeders. This time we used 2 Ross flocks, 1 Ranger Gold and 1 Hubbard flock, and none of these had perches in the pullet period. So the different perches you see on the picture, this is the wooden perch, this is the plastic, steel square perch with the same type of perches you saw in the last study, steel round, and then the Siesta perch. So in the beginning, we placed them in the litter, but then one of the farmers, and farmers do tend to have the best kind of ideas of what working in their house. He said, why won't we place one of them up on the slatted area? So we put one of the 3 up on the slatted area at week 28, so just before week 30. And this picture is taking maybe 30 seconds after we place it there, and the birds were already using it. We observed perching in week 20, 25, 30, 40, 45, and 50. And we also recorded different health indicators at end of lay. So footpad dermatitis, live weight, keelbone fractures using post-mortem this time because we knew how important that was. And we also did some scoring on the roosters. So this is showing the perching across. So you have the week of the age on the x-axis. So basically what we see here is that perching is constant with age, and we did not see any difference between flocks, and we didn't have enough sample size big enough to investigate the effect of hybrid. But notice the Siesta on the slats. So the highest perch, again, is the most popular one. And that after we placed them there, it was the most popular throughout the production period. Again, the y-axis showing that at least mathematically, each meter of perch should be able to accommodate between 6 and 7 birds at these ages. But again, we're far away from that. And so we were a bit critical to ourselves. Okay, there were some limitations here. It was during the light period. We didn't have enough perches for all of them to perch together. The height of the perches, some of them were kind of just lying on top of the slats. And because all of the birds could move around in the whole house, we couldn't assess any effect of health and production of the perches. So that's why we designed a third study. Just quick for you, the health results from the second study. So this is just the footpad dermatitis. We did not see an effect of live weight on the footpad dermatitis. Again, maybe numerically the ROS was kind of a little bit worse, but again, the sample size were too low to make any statistical analysis here. For the keelbone fracture, so we scored 100 random birds from each flock, and the flock prevalence ranged from 14% to 58% of the assessed birds. We didn't find any keelbone fractures in the roosters. And these are the results that are published in this study. So please have a look at that if you want more details. So then we designed our third study. This time we wanted to investigate the effect of perches, so 15 centimeters perch per bird on the perch use, the health, and the production. This time we had 2 breeder flocks. They were both Ross 308. So and they were divided in control and perches. And the really nice thing is that we had 2 farmers. They have quite similar houses, similar layout, and they got their birds from the same rearer. So it was kind of designed for researcher, which was really nice. So in this picture, you see the hen feeder lines on top of the slatted floor. And the farmer had observed that the birds were perching on top of the hen feeder line. So what he did, he placed these steel plates on top of the hen feeder line. So that was actually his idea. He had put that on some parts in his house, and we thought, what if we do that across all feeder lines on one side? But that didn't add up to 15 centimeters per bird. So we needed more perches. That's why we also included plastic perches in order to have enough for all of the birds on this side. And I scored perch use during the dark period, late at night, in week 20, 30, and 40. And we had wonderful farmers facilitating this study. So every day they would score the mortality and the floor eggs per side. So we got really good results from that, because we were worried about floor eggs, because now kind of in the worst case scenario, the birds would have to jump 6 hurdles in order to get back to the nest boxes. So we needed to include that. We also scored footpad dermatitis and breast blisters at 30 weeks and end of lay, so 100 birds per side in each flock. And we did keelbone fractures at end of lay, again 100 birds per side per flock, using postmortem. So what we found, so this is comparing the hen feeder line with and without the steel plate. And what you see is that more hens were perched on the feeder line when the steel plated was mounted, at least in week 25 and 35. At week 45, it wasn't that big of a difference anymore. Yeah, just to remind you how the different treatments looked. And now look at the y-axis. So again, each meter of perch could accommodate 6.6 birds, kind of mathematically. And we see now, finally, we have full capacity. The birds are using all of the perches. If we look only on the perch side, so comparing the the feeder perch with the plastic perch, I mean, the figure speaks for itself. They prefer to perch on the feeder line compared to the plastic perch. And with all I've told you about height, it shouldn't be that big of a surprise, really. When it comes to the health indicators, at 30 weeks, we saw lower foot-pod dermatitis on the side with perches. So the bottom picture is one of the worst. I just wanted to draw your attention to it because these farmers, I mean, the litter quality was really good. The air quality was good. They are doing everything right. Still, we do see some of the birds ending up with feet like this. So this is an issue that we are currently working further on together with the farmers as well, because we don't really understand why this is happening, as long as the litter quality is really good. We did not see an effect of treatment on mortality or on the number of floor eggs, which was really important for us to investigate. So for the keelbone fractures, again, just a reminder, we had 400 hens, 40 roosters. One of the flocks were sent to an abattoir, so we scored keelbone fractures after the birds had been gassed. And the other flock was gassed on farm. So we did all the postmortem outside in -10 degrees, which is what you do in Norway. We found that between 47 and 53% of birds had keelbone fractures. And they all look like the picture I showed you in the beginning. It's in the inside of the keel on the tip. There were no effect or no differences between treatments, and we did not find a single keelbone fracture in the roosters. So this is how, again, it will typically look like, and you cannot palpate this from the outside. We were actually 2 observers scoring. We palpated all of the birds, scoring yes or no, not telling each other what we scored, and then we did the postmortem, and we could see that it's really difficult to palpate them. So we worked a lot with the farmers during this, and we kind of wanted their opinion as well about the perches. And they are, I mean, as long as the birds are using it and it adds something valuable to the birds, they are happy to give it. But of course, you need to buy them. It needs to be placed in the facility. It needs to be washed, which is a big job. And it also needs to be stored. So they're like, it is an extra job for us. So we need at least to know that it's actually giving the birds something, not just extra work for us. Which brings me to how to place the breeders, how to place the perches. Because as I've shown you, use is affected by several interacting factors. It's affected by the age of the bird, the hybrid, the perch height, where you place them, whether you place them in the litter or up on the slatted floor, the comfort of the perch, so with and without that steel plate, as you remember, the perch length, all birds need to be able to perch together, and of course, time of day. So you see here on the picture, we place this wonderful perch out on the slatted floor, but they want to perch higher up and in an area where more birds can perch together. And this is a wide slatted area. Some farmers do have a more narrow slatted area, which makes it more difficult to kind of where should we place the perches, because as long as you have a slatted area where the birds want to stay, it could be hard to compete. And I mean, it would be really a waste to place a lot of perches that the farmers need to wash out in the litter area, and they still would stay in the slatted area, which kind of, it's just a lot of job for nothing. So it's not one size fits all. It's a different interacting factors that we need to have more thought in our head. Okay, so to sum it all up, just looking at the time, I don't think I'm doing too bad. So what we have seen in these 3 studies is that the broiler breeders, they are using the perches. They do have a motivation to perch, but it is affected by several interacting factors. And I think the most important, at least from our experience, the perches need to be elevated and give enough space for all birds to perch at the same times, because it's an anti-predatory behavior. They want to be synchronous. It's not wise to be the one hen perching in a different area. You want to be together with the flock. And in our experience, perches need to be one of the highest place to sit in the house, because they want to get up high, which this was a very it showed it really well when we put the Siesta perch up on the slats. In our experience, we didn't find any negative effect on placing the perches on the health of the birds or production. And again, we were worried about increasing the number of floor eggs, but that was not found in our studies. And to sum up keelbone fractures, what we have seen is that between 14 and 58% of the hens are affected, again with the typical fractures looking like the picture on the right here. It's not an issue for roosters. We need more studies on the prevalence of keelbone fractures in broiler breeders, and also on the causation, because we still do not know full well why it happened and how we can prevent it. Recently, we have had more focus on kind of of course, the welfare aspect of it as well. How painful is this for the birds? So we need definitely more knowledge about this. And if you are to score keelbone fractures in laying hens or in broiler breeders, you need to use an X-ray or a post-mortem, because palpation gives poor sensitivity and it will underestimate the prevalence. And is likely not affected by perches. Keelbone deviation, yes, we didn't really see much keelbone deviation, but keelbone fracture is likely caused by other things apart from perches. So I want to thank you all for the attention. The 3 studies that I've been telling you about have all been published in Applied, and the last one on the health scorings were published in Poultry Science last year. So I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Opening the Q&A box here. First question. I'm thinking about the temperature and metal perches. What was the room temperature in all farms? As there was no difference in the preference of material, would you expect to see difference in the lower temperatures?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So I think the main, at least in the broiler breeder facilities, it's about 20 degrees. And I don't think temperature would affect maybe kind of the steel perches would feel a bit cooler, but I don't think that would affect the perching behavior at all, really. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. With that, so the metal perches were on top of the feeder in that last study, right? And the plastic
Yes.
ones were not. I have a lot of questions about the perches on the feeders. I think that's very interesting. Were there any like biosecurity or contamination issues with the birds perching on the feeders?
Yeah, that's a question I get quite often, actually. So the nice part of this is that the farmer had actually tested these steel plates in at least 2 flocks prior to us doing that study. And we visited the flock previous to the study just to investigate that as well. And you see, because of the width of the hen feeder lines are quite narrow, so they do not defecate in the feeder at all. So no, it wasn't an issue. What the farmer did feel was an issue because these steel plates are just stripped on top of the hen feeder line. So he needed to clip them all up in order to wash them properly between each flock. So that it is an extra job. He cannot just leave them there because there is a little bit of kind of where it hits and you can have some bacteria or virus there. So yeah, he definitely spent a few extra hours cleaning them, but no, the food quality of the birds is intact. Yeah.
Yeah, it looked like they kind of it hung off, you know, the
Yes, yeah.
straight down.
The butt is away from the food. Yes.
Yes, that's good. And with that, looking at the different widths, did you look at the widths, or I assume that was kind of related to the perch type? Do you have any comments on, you know, a width? Is there too wide or too narrow on the perch?
Yeah, so the Siesta perch especially is actually the widest one. So the birds couldn't really kind of hold around. They kind of, it was more of a flat way that the feet would, but still it was the most popular one. So we were surprised about that because we thought maybe it was too wide for them, especially for the pullets. But no, and it varied between, so the Siesta perches were 15 or 8 centimeters wide, and the wooden perch I think was the most narrow one, but no, we didn't see any effect on that at all. Yeah.
Do you think you could go wider?
I think at least some studies have found that the younger birds, I think that's laying hen pullets. A new study from Sweden showed that the wider the perch, the better. So it was kind of a really wide rope, I think, and that was the most preferred one by the laying hen pullets because it's stable. It gives them stability. But for the adult birds, I do think that they want to prefer to be able to kind of grasp around it, but I'm kind of speculating now.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think about the dexterity of a laying hen versus a broiler breeder or a broiler with the perching. Do they really want to wrap around? And I think you're saying yes.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, they want to be comfortable as well, and that's why we saw such a big difference with the steel plates, because it's kind of all you can look back and say, oh, I should have done that, kind of to observe the number of how long that they would stay in one position and how often they would kind of change their position, because the farmer told me you would often see when they didn't have the steel plates on, they would kind of shift their position all the times and it didn't look comfortable. But we don't have any recordings of that. That might be something we should do. Yeah.
Always more questions at the end of the study.
Absolutely.
Okay, so those are all my questions. I was very interested in that. I'll move on to some Q&A box here. Can you comment on potentially keelbone fractures in free range hens?
Yeah, so we have mostly from free range, so aviary system hens. So that's it's Luman and Decal, but we also have it for red jungle fowl that we got from the university in Sweden. And we see keelbone fractures in all type of systems. So traditionally, some studies have shown a reduced amount of keelbone fracture in cages, but that might also be because you have used palpation and you would have less callus around a fracture when you are sitting more still than when you are moving around. So that might be the reason. But the newer study do not see any difference between organic flocks, multi-tiered aviary flocks, or cages. So it doesn't really have anything to do with the production system. It's interior of the hens related to the egg laying. Yeah.
Very interesting. So it's a surprising result. I think we're hearing here that these keelbone fractures are sort of independent of system, right? So with the transition from cage to cage-free systems, what are the likely welfare issues that birds might experience?
So you would not get more keelbone fractures by setting them or taking them out of the cages. They would still have, and I think you have a lot of welfare benefits of giving them to having them in loose house aviary systems rather than having them in cages. And the keelbone fracture is not affected at least in the last 10 years, all the studies that have come out have not shown anything pointing to being free range, increasing the prevalence of keelbone fractures. So welfare benefits of keeping them loose housed.
Yeah. Let's see, in your rearing study, what was the light period, duration, and light intensity during this time?
Ooh, I should remember that. I can't answer that. It was standard procedure, so you were following the manuals from the Hubbard and the Ross manuals. I don't remember. That's the.
You can't remember every single material and method?
No, I should have, but I'm sorry. I will. Yeah, it's in the paper.
Do you remember if it was different across flocks, since the guides might be different?
Yes, so I think the Hubbards, they tend to have a longer light period because the hens tend to spend more time feeding because they're not as feed motivated perhaps as the Ross 308, so they have a little bit of a longer light period, but I can't really remember how many hours, and it varies of course from week 0 to week 18. It changes according to the manual. Yeah.
Thank you. So pivoting a little bit here, what could be the motivation of early life perching? Possibly to seclude from other birds rather than predator avoidance?
Yeah, I mean, the motivation behind perching. So what we would see, especially in the Siesta groups, in the pullet flocks, they would use it, I think, equally as much to play with than to perch. So they were jumping on and jumping off. So we actually wanted to do, I mean, we were 2 ethologists observing this, and we were like, oh, we should score more, because it looked like they were really using it they were jumping on, jumping off, kind of pushing each other a bit off as well, using it to play with as much as they were using it for perching. So I think having a varied physical environment is really positive, in order both for physical, because you move more and you move in a varied way, but also cognitive, because you learn how to navigate around different obstacles. So it's positive for several things, both cognitive and physically. Yeah.
I'm predicting someone coming out with a jungle gym for playing now. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
And is it common practice for industry in Europe to provide perches, and at what age?
No, for broiler breeders, it's not common. I think, at least in Norway, and I think in many countries, you would provide the pullets with platforms underneath the water line. So you would learn they need to jump on the slatted area to drink when they come into the production facilities. But perches is, it's not mandatory in most countries. I think Switzerland and part of Germany have now included it in their regulation, and the Norwegian government are following, but most countries do not. And I don't think they provide them a lot of perches. So it's not standard at all.
We have lots of time for questions, and we have lots of questions, so this is very good. Going back a little bit into the methods of things, so we talked about like the location a little bit. Going further with the perch location, it seems like in experiment 3 that it was the location might have been a little confounding for the perch location. Did you change the position on the slats, and would the location also have affected the use? For example, more distributed chickens at the front side of the raised slatted area?
Yeah, so you could kind of think that, especially the first plastic perch, that was where all the birds were kind of going back and forth. So it's the most disturbed area, so to speak. So we should maybe call it perch line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because there was actually 6 lines of perches, 3 feeder line and 3 plastic perch lines going all across. We didn't include that in the analysis, but I remember seeing that some of the birds perching on the outermost perches were kind of pushed a little bit because birds were going back and forth. but yeah, no, apart from that, I think for the hen feeder line perches, they would definitely prefer that. Those were always full before birds were kind of getting reluctantly on on the plastic perches. Yeah.
So with that, you said that the birds use the metal slats on the feeder line more likely because it was the highest, it was the most raised location, but also there's the resource, right? So you're talking about having them in high traffic areas or near the feeder or the water. Do you think that there's also that value of the location where the resource is for the perches, and should perches be in high resource areas or sort of in a way not high traffic area?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really important question, whether some of the, especially if the kind of the low ranking individuals were to kind of not be able to go to the feeder because there were kind of hens all atop all the feeders, so it's kind of hard to get access to the feeders. So we didn't see any, I didn't include that in the presentation, but for the feed intake and the live weight and all of this, it was not a difference between the control and the perch side. So I'm not gonna, I can't say it didn't affect them, but I don't think it did. They didn't spend the light period that much perching. This was during nighttime where they wouldn't really eat or drink that much anyway. But yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna, it could be an issue for some of the birds to not have access to the feed and water line, and it might not be that visible on the picture, but on the nest boxes, and I'm sure this is the same in many countries, you would kind of have a roof above the nest boxes, and some of the farmers were thinking maybe we should place the perches there because it's kind of an area where you don't really use that area. So that could be a nice place to put perches to really give them a secluded area away from the feed and the water. I don't know anybody who has done that yet, but these farmers, they always have some new ideas of ways to do things.
Yeah, they're in there the most, so they have great ideas.
Yeah.
Did the roosters use the perches over the feeders as well?
They used them a little bit. So the details of the roosters is also included in that paper, but to a far less extent. They tend to spend their time also during the dark period, because I was there a lot after the light went out. The roosters tended to be down in the litter. So some roosters were found on the perches, but it's not as consistent as you would see in the hens, for sure. Yeah.
Lots of feeder perch questions here.
Yeah.
So the metal perches were on the feeders, plastic on the slats. Could it be that the birds did not like the plastic? Could it be the material instead of the height?
I don't think so. But of course, the only way to investigate that would to have plastic perches at the same height, and then you could compare it. So somebody do that. That would be really nice to know. My theory is that it has to do with the height, and especially because the plastic perches were placed in these plugs, so it did elevate them a little bit, but when there were enough birds on it, it would be squished down, so you couldn't really grasp around. So then it would kind of be flat on the ground when there were more 3, 4, 5 birds perching on it. So no, my theory is that it's the height, and that's also consistent with all the other studies that we've seen in laying hens as well, that the height is important. But yeah,
that's interesting. Thinking about materials, that's sort of a pro metal, right? It won't bow, or at least it takes more weight for it to bow in the middle for that grasping.
Yeah. And I know that some farmers are not a big fan of that plastic perch, and we just needed to buy something that was commercially available. And if you look closely on the perch, it has little lines on top of it, and the farmer's like, oh, how am I going to clean that? So they would actually prefer steel perches because it's kind of easier to clean and it looks really fresh, rather than the plastic, that it does get little scratches in it where kind of viruses can hide. So yeah, I think at least some of them would prefer steel perches rather than the plastic ones.
Less porous. So did you, in your perch study in the production period, did you monitor the incidence of floor eggs?
Yes, in the third study, only in the third study. So we had farmers scoring number of floor eggs every day throughout the cycle. And again, the details of this is published in the paper. We did not see any difference between the treatment and the perch side. Because that was something that we were worried about, having more floor eggs, because that's of course very costly and time consuming for the farmers if some of the birds were not able to reach the nest boxes. But we did not see a difference in number of floor eggs between the treatments.
A little more time here. Was there any correlation between higher egg production and prevalence of keelbone fractures?
So we didn't look at that actually. I guess we do have the numbers for that, but we haven't. So far we have just scored or published the prevalence of the keelbone fractures. So I don't know actually. That's the quick question or answer to that. That will of course be really interesting.